From Unity of Houston, Texas, this is the Awakened Life with Reverend Howard Caesar. Unity is a non-denominational spiritual community providing a positive, practical, and progressive approach to Christianity. Let's join the service in progress now with Reverend Howard Caesar.
You know, as a child, we all liked a good story, and I think we've never lost the child in us that likes a good story. Many of us had our parents read stories to us in our youth, and maybe around bedtime, if not during the day as well. I don't recall my parents actually reading stories to me. I just don't remember back then if we had a bunch of little books or something that were being read to me, but I sure do recall reading to my three children. They would come with a stack of books and then stand there and say, "Daddy, will you read to me?" And then, of course, I would never say no. And they would plunk the books and they would crawl up in my lap and snuggle up and we would read. And many of you have experienced the same thing. And then, of course, now I have grandchildren. And so I am Papa. And Papa, will you read? And of course, my heart melts at the request. And so we have two grandchildren who live up in the Northwest, and so we visit as often as we can, and then they come see us as well. But they have a practice there of they never go to bed without having a book read to them. And we try and reduce it down so it's not a long book. But it is a practice, so we're always honored, my wife Diane and I, when we are asked to be the one to tuck them in and read a book before turning out the light. So there's something about, you know, reading stories that take us through life, really, and the stories are there to convey a message. These books that are for children obviously are intended to create character traits and internal strengths that they are like the seeds that are planted that stay with them for a lifetime, that are carried through the words of a story and a happening, and it's visual pictures. It can be about creating honesty. It can be about creating optimism and faith and love and all of these various other characteristics that makes a child into the beautiful soul that they're really intended to be. Probably we all grew up with knowing about the little train that could, right? I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, chugga, 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 chugga. We all have had that one. Then there's the Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz is a very metaphysical kind of story, whatever the age. You know, the Tin Man discovered that he had a heart when he thought that, you know, he would only find it somewhere outside of himself, searching and searching, needing to have a heart, and it was there the whole time. And sometimes we need to find our heart as we go through certain circumstances, don't we? We become, in moments of time during the journey of life, a tin man. And then we return again and find our heart and realize it was there, it was always with us, and that things turn out a whole lot better in our life when we do. And so for Dorothy and the Straw Man and the Tin Man and all of them, they just had to believe. They just had to believe, and then they were able to return to that place. And so I recall loving the experience of hearing my dad tell stories. Now, my dad never would sit down and say, "I'm going to tell you a story." But my dad would have friends that would come over and visit. They might be hunting buddies or friends from work or what have you. And they might come in the evening, and then they would sit and maybe have a beer and talk, and they would get into telling their stories. And my father was very much into hunting and fishing, and so I was little and I hadn't yet done any of that. And so it was such an adventure to hear him tell about on this lake and this happening and how many fish they caught and how big they were. And certain, you know, they deer hunted back in Wisconsin, and hearing some of those stories were really neat. And then he would get into telling also some of the challenges that he had. He ran a business, and there were things in regard to that. But he also talked about a time where, you know, he was an athlete, and he was playing baseball as a young man, and he had just gotten married, and he was still playing, and some guy ran into him as a catcher in a certain way in which he did damage to his shoulder and was unable to lift his arm for over a year, and they couldn't figure out how to heal it. There was some nerve damage, And so there was no way to lift his arm, and he couldn't go to work and didn't know what was going to happen. And he told the story about how he found this way, a particular way, unique way, that he was guided to help that heal and for the feeling to come back. And I won't get into how he did that, but he did it, and he found a way, and that's what's important. And he also told about a time where he was in a crawl space and he was working, and he stumbled forward, and there was a piece of metal hanging down, and he fell into it, and it tore his forehead all the way back, his head open, very, very serious, and he always had a scar from about here up into his hairline. And I always wondered what was, until I finally, when I was about 10 or 12, I heard him tell the story to somebody. And it's interesting how we don't know so much about each other until we really take the time to hear the stories of our life. They're so unique and special. And sometimes we feel too vulnerable to tell all of our stories, and others we maybe want to, but we don't take the time, or we don't get the time to really get to know one another as much as we can. And there's something beautiful that happens where you just feel a lot closer to a person when they open up and start sharing parts of themselves, because we all have a story, and we're writing our story every day. Every day we add to that story, and there are highlights and there are lowlights, and there are things that challenge us, and it's very valuable sometimes to hear another person's story and what they faced and what they went through. My father fell asleep driving home late one night and just fell asleep into an oak tree, and he almost died. It was very close. A farmer found him, and he lived. And just hearing that story, and there's much around that as well. But he would talk about some of his business dealings and great deals he did on the side with real estate that helped him prosper, and how pieces came together in such an amazing way. And these are all so impactful, I think. Sometimes we hear something from another, and we tuck that away, and it helps us move through something. It's almost like a seed that gets planted in us. You know, our trip, we just got back from a trip through the Northeast. The cruise was from Boston to Montreal. And we had 26 people with us on this cruise, and we had 3 tables we'd eat at every evening. And so Diane and I maneuvered around, so we got to each table, and at the tables were people telling stories. And these are people that I've known, but I have never gotten the opportunity to spend the time to hear their stories. And you feel so bonded and so connected at such a new and wonderful way when you hear their stories, because everyone has a story, and everyone is going through their unique challenges, and they're looking for the support around them, and there were people and things that happened, and this came together, and they're beautiful stories, and you get to see how God is really working in everyone's life, and that there are seemingly magical things that take place that come together, and you see also that there are painful, difficult things, trials and tribulations that people have maneuvered through and beyond, or gone through. One fellow was telling how he was number 1 in motocross, on motorcycling some years ago, and he was about to have a contract with a sponsor, and everything was going great, and it's about that time he had an accident on one of the races and slid on a turn and flew into, and they had bales of hay then, and he was pinned up against the bale of hay, and he said it was the cycle that did all the damage. The cycle then blew into him, sandwiched him between the two, and he said he had over 70-some bones broken. And went to the hospital, and his cycle career was over. He had his jaw wired together. They had to break it 3 or 4 months later because he couldn't open it. It healed wrong. These were things that he went through, having to eat through a straw for 7 months. Just amazing things like this that people shared. And another person had an undetected hole in his heart. And he shared how his mother had a hole in her heart and had died of it, and so he had been watching for it and watching for it, but somehow it went undetected in some particular way. And so he was on his way to work, and it was only like a couple of years ago. And he got disoriented and didn't quite know where he was going, and he went into a staircase that nobody used, and then stumbled and fell down the staircase and was out. And somebody came in there shortly, in a short timeline, which was miraculous because nobody went into this stairwell, and found him, immediately got the EMS. The EMS came, and they were the EMS that was specialized in strokes, got him the care and whatever he needed immediately, so that he did not experience any paralysis or any symptoms that often occur for a person who has a stroke. And then he had surgery, and they repaired the hole in the heart, and there he was to talk about it over a wonderful meal on a cruise. But it was beautiful, and we all just felt the energy somehow of, wow, how all the pieces, and he, as he tells the story, it's really a work of God, as all of the things came together in the timing of it that was so powerful that it was a gift to us. It was, again, another one of the stories that went around the table, and I could tell you more. But we all have stories, and well, it's a good thing to hear our stories and to know what, I know that all of you have overcome many things. I know that all of you have faced many things. Some of them I know about, and we've prayed through them. A husband and wife at the table also, I mean, there were some joyous things, not just overcomings, but one told about how she had just had a hole-in-one. And it was her second hole-in-one, and during the course of her life of golf. And so she said that the good thing was that she was the last one, last group on the course. It was at a tournament, and somehow everyone had pretty much left, so she didn't have to buy a round for everybody. And her husband actually is a big golfer too, and he had a hole-in-one he told about, and he said it just so happened it was a rare day that he was out golfing alone, and he had a hole-in-one, and he said, however, there was a groundskeeper standing there when he hit, because it was a par 3, and so the groundskeeper, I don't know if he took a picture of the guy or what, but to prove that he had a hole-in-one. It's like the joke of the preacher or the priest that was out golfing in the morning, you know, on a Sunday morning, and a hole-in-one, and he couldn't tell anybody because he wasn't supposed to be there. So, but I know that was going on at the other tables, not just the tables that Diane and I were at. And it was a beautiful kind of a bonding when people share themselves and are vulnerable like that. These are people that talk about how they found a way back after they were frustrated or frightened or scared, facing some situation. That with God, they found a way. And I want to tell you, our flight, we almost didn't make it back. We had a flight with a connection from Montreal to Toronto, and then Toronto to Houston. When we got to Toronto, they had control tower, air control problems. And somehow or another, a number of flights had to be canceled, and ours was one of them. And so there were long lines of people trying to get a flight home. And we were at the back of a line, and it hadn't moved in like an hour. And there are people that are angry and upset all around us, of course. Not of course, but they can be. And it was one of those things that I was sitting there and I was so calm, and I just thought to myself, God, how are you going to get us home on this one? I have to speak tomorrow. And I thought to myself, I'm not always this calm. What is it? I just noticed the difference that in earlier days, I would have probably been a little bit more like some of the people around me. But I wasn't. It was like, let's see how you do this one. And about an hour in, Diane said, why don't we call our travel agent? And so that was a brilliant idea. So I called, and of course it was Saturday, so it was closed. He doesn't work Saturday, Sundays. He's in LA. But he had an emergency number, so I called the emergency number and got him. And I told him, we've been waiting in line, you know, the flights are canceled, they're giving out vouchers to stay overnight, I really need to get back, I'm supposed to speak. And he said, why didn't you call me an hour ago? I said, well, you're right. But anyway, he got on and he found us the last 2 remaining tickets of any flight from Toronto to Houston. And it was late at night. We got in after, we got home after 1:30 this morning to our house. But the good news was also we got on, and after a long wait there on the airport, and he got us first-class tickets. We were a coach, but they bumped us up to first class because any seat they would give you for the same price, because it wasn't an act of God. It was for us an act of God. But the air control tower problem was not due to weather. Otherwise, they wouldn't do that. So anyway, it was just a lot of things like that happened. And, you know, Jesus was speaking to a group of people, and to his disciples as well. And there was a man, a VIP of the synagogue, that came up to him and had worshiped Jesus and thought highly of him and said, my daughter just died, but please come, put your hand on her and she will live. And so Jesus went and he arrived at this man's house, and there were minstrels playing and other things going on that were in the tradition of a person who had died. And Jesus said to them something like, that's enough. The girl is not dead, she sleepeth. And when Jesus said that, and it's in the passage, they laughed him to scorn. But the story goes on to say that, and this is a key, when he had put the people out, he went in and held her hand, and the little girl arose. Now, what you need to understand in that is the metaphysics and the depth of that is that he moved all the energy of disbelief out of the room. The room is your mind in your situations. You have to remove all that would resist something rising up in good in your life and bringing you back to life, some form of life, when you've gone astray from that life. So it's a powerful story. And we have the hand of Christ always being reached out, because the hand of Christ really represents our higher self. It's always there, always extending an invitation to come up higher and move beyond the small, lesser self, and move that out of the room, release it, if you will. So it's a wonderful, powerful story. And there's another story that really has to do with Jesus as well, and it has to do with the pool of Bethesda. You know, we all tell stories, and sometimes we get stuck in a story, and it's a sad woe is me story, and we tell that over and over. And sometimes if we may know a person who is stuck in a story, and that's all we hear is their story. And when we see them coming, we don't necessarily want to be there because we've heard that story, right? Anyway, the Pool of Bethesda story in the Bible is sort of like that, in that Jesus was, well, let me tell you about the pool. The pool, first of all, you know the story. There was when the Spirit moved and stirred in the water, it was said that it had healing properties in this particular pool. And if you could get into it soon enough and be like one of the first or the first into the pool, that you would have the opportunity to heal. Well, this one guy had been there, and it says for 38 years, and everything is, even numbers are significant to the story, but we won't go that deep today. But he was there, and he was basically in the shade of 5 porticos to stay out of the sun. And he had been there for 38 years. And when the waters stirred, he could never get there. Everyone else beat him there. He didn't have any help. It was a kind of a story of woe. Keep in mind that 5 porticos represented the 5 senses. So his story was about the 5 senses were telling him there was everything that stood in the way for him to have his good. Okay? That his perception was removing him from manifesting a perspective, a reality that would take him forward. And so, anyway, Jesus came along and asked him a question. He said, do you want to be healed? And he didn't answer the question. He went into his story. He went into a sad story. And he started telling Jesus, didn't answer, do I want to be healed? But I've been here 38 years, and let me tell you, when the waters stir, nobody helps me. I don't get in. I'm always too late. The water is done. I don't get healed. It just doesn't happen. It's kind of like that. And So then Jesus told him, enough. Rise, rise. He just told him to rise. And what does that mean? It means rise out of that vibration and that frequency, because everything is a vibrational match. And if you're going to change the manifestation of anything in your world, prosperity, whatever, you have to move beyond the vibration of what is manifesting. You have to get beyond it. You have to rise above it. And that's a universal principle. And Jesus told him to rise above those 5 porticles, those 5 senses, and be healed. There's one last story I want to tell you, because it's a powerful story that has stayed with me a long time. It's a guy by the name of Tom Helms, and he wrote a book to tell this story. It was contained within it. And basically, he tells about a time he was hitchhiking home college as a freshman in college, and this was in North Carolina, and the guy who picked him up, it was a slick, rainy day, and he slid out of control down an embankment. In the crash, he broke his neck, and the next thing he knew, he had 2 steel pins. He could not move a single muscle, and he was in this hospital. And after 5 weeks of not moving, the doctor came in one morning, and he said to Tom, you need to prepare yourself to accept the possibility that you're not going to get better, you're not going to move. You have to accept this, prepare for that. And then Tom kind of reacted. He got a little angry, and he said, do you go into surgery prepared to lose? Does a person go into a fight prepared that they're going to lose the fight? And he said, well, we're not talking about sports, the doctor said. Yeah, but we're talking about a fight here, and this is my life, and I want to fight for it. I don't want to be preparing for not having, it any better. And so the doctor said, you have a limited amount of energy. He didn't bend to unity. There's an infinite energy to move, but he was told that, and that you really have to be careful how you're channeling your energy. That was but anyway, Tom asked the doctor what his chances were of ever moving again. And the doctor said, I'd say that you might be able to move your shoulders and your upper arm. And then he asked, what are the odds of me walking again? And the doctor said, it's my medical opinion that you won't. And then Tom asked, how many patients in my condition would you have to have before one walked? Would it be 1,000? Would it be 10,000? How many? And the doctor shook his head and said, I'm afraid you'll have to talk to a theologian to get your odds. And so, anyway, he began to concentrate, intense concentration on moving his toe. And he concentrated for hours. And weeks later, his mother came in, was sitting there reading, and all of a sudden it happened. He said, I think it moved. I think it moved. I think I moved my toe. Because he would say to his toe, he'd say, move toe, you're going to move toe. Toe, you're going to move. Well, he couldn't feel it, but he had this knowing that he had moved his toe. So he said, Mom, come, look at my toe. And so she lifted the sheet. He said, it's moving, isn't it? It's moving. No, I'm sorry, it's not moving. Mom, you got to see, I know it's moving. It's moving. I know it. I can't feel it, but I know it is. And he just kind of was into this rage because he had been so frustrated for so long. And his mother said, well, maybe. And then he says, Mom, don't lie if you don't see it moving. So this exchange went on. And so anyway, she went next to the bed to kind of reassure him. And when she did, she stopped. And she said, wait a minute, do it again. Move your toe, move it. And he did. And she smiled and tears started coming down her face. And she said, Tommy, it's not your toe, it's your thumb. It's your thumb. Your thumb is moving. And the two of them went into laughter, just pouring laughter from the frustration and the agony and the fear and the loneliness, and everything came bubbling up, and they were just roaring with laughter. It's my thumb! Tears coming out of both of them. He went on to walk again, went back to college, and graduated, fell and bumped his head on the bumper, moving his luggage back home after he had graduated. Broke his neck in the same place, found himself in the same hospital, totally paralyzed. Fought his way back again to walking. And the story goes on. Here's a person who refused to give up, recognized there is always a way, that God is at work in our lives. And hopefully very few of us ever have to face a test as big as he did. But my point is, that's a story that has been with me all these years. And I can go back to it. I share it with you now because never, never underestimate the spirit that is within you. That no matter what you face, there is something bigger than those 5 porticos are telling you. There's a light that wants to shine through you. And this individual was able to persevere. We all have stories. Our life is a story. It has its ups and downs. It has its challenges. Yes, we're all going to die, but die what? Die of the physical. The spirit never dies. Begin to identify with the spirit that will see you through every situation while you're here in the 3-dimensional world and beyond, because that's really who you are. And the more that you identify with the spirit that you are and is inherent in you, the more you will always feel an all-conquering spirit that will move you and always find a way. We caught a flight that got us here today to share this with you, and I thank God. God bless you all.
Thank you for joining us for today's message. We invite you to be with us again next Sunday. Unity is inclusive, welcoming people of all walks of life in dignity and love. We believe that love, strength, and goodness dwells within you. May we all live in unity with God, humanity, and all of God's creation. And remember, as Reverend Caesar says, life is meant to be good.
Hi, thank you for tuning in this morning with us and our broadcast. And also thank you for tuning in through the weeks and months and perhaps years that you may have been watching our TV broadcast and any support you may have been giving our ministry. We have some changes that are underway and want to be sure you are informed so that you can continue to be a part of our viewing audience. We are going to be able to provide live our entire worship service. That includes the lesson, the meditation, great music, and all elements of the service beginning September 10th. At that time, I will also be passing on ministerial leadership to my successor, Reverend Michael Gott, who is wonderful, and you are going to love him. August 27th will be our last time on TV, on television. But you will have the opportunity to stay with us on computer, on Facebook, on tablet, simply by going to our website, unityhouston.org. At 11 a.m. each Sunday, we'll be there live on your home page, and you can worship with us in its entirety. We are going worldwide, global, and we are very excited about that. Also, if you are not able to join us on computer, we're able to provide a DVD, and you simply need to call the church to set that up and make arrangements. That's at 713-782-4050. We have been on television these past 13 years, and it's been our honor to serve you in this way. I thank all of you, those who are longtime listeners and those of you who may be new. But we sincerely hope that you will join us as we move forward to expand our reach and take these wonderful teachings to the world. God bless.